He should be here this weekend. It's the Super Bowl. I mean,
Right.
everybody was his pick, and all of that stuff is going to happen. If he's not at the Super Bowl, that's going to be quite telling. But
They said Jay-Z built an empire, but what if the empire built him? What if the billionaire mogul, the culture curator, the man standing beside presidents and headlining Super Bowl negotiations wasn't just a genius businessman, but a carefully selected gatekeeper placed at the very center of Black culture to steer it exactly where powerful corporations wanted it to go? Because that is the storm Jaguar Wright just kicked open. And she didn't whisper it, she didn't imply it, she said it outright. This isn't about music charts. This isn't about rap beef. This isn't about nostalgia. This is about files, secret files, names and documents, silence from media giants, and a Super Bowl shadow hanging over everything. The conversation starts subtly. Industry talk, old relationships, early Jay-Z days, Aaliyah, Foxy Brown, Bianca, Rihanna, patterns, power, influence. And then suddenly the room shifts. The tone drops. The air tightens. Because when the topic turns to files, Jaguar stops sounding like an artist and starts sounding like someone who believes she's seen behind the curtain. And the first bomb hits right here.
Will come out on TMZ because TMZ is not only not reporting on the fact that Harvey Levin is in the files, but they're not reporting on Jay-Z being in the files either. It's funny, the things that they don't report on.
That's not a casual accusation. That's a direct challenge to media power. She's not just saying Jay-Z's name is in something controversial. She's saying the machine isn't reporting it, that the silence is intentional, that the omission is louder than any headline. And here's where this gets dangerous, because once you suggest media blackout, you're not talking about gossip anymore. You're talking about protection, shielding, coordinated narrative control. And if that's true, then the story isn't Jay-Z. The story is who protects Jay-Z. Jaguar doesn't frame him as loud. She doesn't frame him as chaotic. She frames him as quiet. Strategic, calculated, a man who doesn't need to scream because the system moves for him. Then comes the Super Bowl, and suddenly the biggest televised event in America becomes a measuring stick. That right there, that's a loaded sentence. Because the Super Bowl isn't just football, it's spectacle, it's corporate sponsorship, it's culture, it's music, it's halftime shows, it's influence, it's power curated for mass consumption. And Jay-Z has been directly connected to the shaping of that spectacle. So if his presence becomes telling, then what exactly are we being told? Jaguar hints that absence would mean more than presence. That disappearance could signal strategy. That strategy could signal fear. And fear could signal exposure. But she doesn't stop there. She escalates.
Right now, there's an entire machine that is working to try to find a way to salvage his image. You've got
an entire machine, not a publicist, not a statement, not a tweet. A machine. That word changes everything. Machines are coordinated. Machines are structured. Machines don't panic, they calculate. If there's a machine protecting an image, then the image must be valuable. If the image must be salvaged, then something threatened it. If something threatened it, then what's inside those files? Jaguar starts building the narrative piece by piece. She describes charm, charisma, the wolf dressed as sheep, the ability to behave when necessary, the timing, the control, and then she shifts into what she claims those files describe. This is where the story becomes explosive, because it stops being about individual relationships and starts being about cultural direction.
How they talk about in those files, like how he was used to keep the blacks in line. How he was used. It's clearly, eloquently explained how he was chosen and selected and put in power to mislead the Black community into doing whatever.
Chosen, selected, put in power. Those aren't random words. Those are system words. They imply design. They imply planning. They imply that the rise of Jay-Z wasn't just talent and hustle, but approval and placement. And here's why this narrative hits so hard. Because Jay-Z's image has always been empowerment, ownership, billionaire Black excellence, business mogul, cultural architect. So when someone claims that same architect was used to keep the Blacks in line, it flips the entire mythology. And then she delivers the knockout line.
It pretty much details that he is the biggest sellout to
That's not criticism. That's cultural betrayal. That's a redefinition of legacy. If that accusation sticks, even symbolically, it rewrites decades of influence. And influence is the key word. Because this isn't just about music. It's about shaping narratives, deciding which artists rise, determining what themes dominate mainstream rap, aligning entertainment with corporate partnerships, negotiating platforms like the Super Bowl halftime show. And when Jaguar says machine, she suggests something bigger than a label. She suggests infrastructure. And when she says files, she suggests documentation, not rumor, documentation. Now here's where the tension becomes almost cinematic. The conversation circles back to perception, to how he appears, to charm, to timing. She says he knows how to behave when he needs to behave. That line is crucial because it paints the picture of someone who understands optics deeply, who knows when to speak, when to stay silent, when to show up, when to vanish. And that makes the Super Bowl speculation even heavier. If he shows up, it's dominance. If he doesn't, it's calculation. Either way, the machine keeps moving. But here's the deeper psychological layer Jaguar touches on without screaming it: belief. She questions why people defend him so fiercely, why loyalty overrides scrutiny, why celebrity becomes almost spiritual for some supporters. That's where the narrative shifts from industry to psychology, because controlling culture doesn't require force. It requires belief. If the audience believes, the narrative sustains itself. If the audience refuses to question, the structure remains intact. And Jaguar's frustration isn't just at Jay-Z, it's at silence, at YouTubers who won't touch it, at media outlets that won't headline it, at influencers who pivot to safer stories. She's framing this as a collective avoidance. And avoidance is suspicious. Now think about this in the context of Black culture. Hip-hop has always positioned itself as rebellion, anti-establishment, voice of the streets. So if one of its biggest moguls is allegedly aligned with corporate directives to keep the blacks in line, then the rebellion becomes performance. That's the twist. That's why this story has such explosive potential, because it reframes empowerment as choreography. It reframes billionaire success as corporate alignment. It reframes the Super Bowl stage as cultural theater. And Jaguar presents herself not as a jealous outsider, but as someone who saw early contracts, early pressures, early manipulation. She speaks about young girls being moved around, about power dynamics, about rooms with no lawyers, about control structures that operate quietly. Those earlier details build credibility for her larger accusation. She's saying the system has always been like this, and Jay-Z, in her framing, mastered it, or was placed at its center. Part 1 ends here. The tension is building. The machine is moving. The Super Bowl looms. And the biggest question still hangs in the air. If the files are real, and the silence is intentional, then who benefits most from keeping this story buried? And here is where the narrative stops being a rumor and starts feeling like a psychological chessboard. Because once Jaguar drops the idea that someone was chosen and selected, she is no longer talking about accidental success or lucky timing or even ruthless ambition. She is talking about design, about placement, about a structure that decides who becomes the face of culture and who gets erased from it. And that implication alone transforms Jay-Z from a self-made mogul into something far more strategic in the public imagination. Because think about the timing of everything she referenced. Think about how hip-hop shifted from rebellious street storytelling to corporate boardrooms and billion-dollar brand deals. Think about how the Super Bowl halftime show became less about raw energy and more about curated messaging and safe spectacle. Think about how the very same man accused in those files is also the architect behind negotiating who stands on that stage, who performs, who gets global visibility, who gets sanitized for prime time. And suddenly the word control stops sounding dramatic and starts sounding structural. Jaguar does not scream. She does not rage wildly. She delivers her claims in this steady rhythm that makes them more unsettling. Because she frames Jay-Z not as chaotic or reckless, but as disciplined, controlled, calculating. Someone who knows how to behave exactly the way he needs to behave when he needs to behave that way. And that image of quiet precision is more dangerous than loud scandal because it suggests long-term strategy instead of short-term mistakes. And then there is the psychological hook she drops when she talks about charm. Because charm is not aggression. Charm is not dominance. Charm is persuasion. Charm is the ability to make rooms comfortable, to make executives feel safe, to make audiences feel inspired, to make artists feel protected. And if you are allegedly a wolf in sheep's clothing, as she implies metaphorically, then the sheep never feel threatened until the door is already closed. That metaphor changes everything, because it reframes decades of public appearances, interviews, philanthropy, corporate partnerships, and cultural leadership as performance. And performance is powerful when the audience does not know it is watching one. The Super Bowl angle lingers over this entire story like a looming spotlight. Because the Super Bowl is not just a football event, it is one of the most watched broadcasts on the planet. It is advertising dominance, corporate celebration, and cultural packaging all rolled into one. And the idea that someone allegedly named in secret files would also be connected to shaping that spectacle adds a cinematic layer to the accusation that cannot be ignored. If someone truly wanted to influence culture at scale, we're better than the halftime stage that millions of households watch simultaneously. We're better than the event that blends sports, music, patriotism, branding, and global exposure into one synchronized display. We're better than the exact space where entertainment meets corporate power without apology. Jaguar leans into the idea that absence could be telling, and that thought alone is a narrative grenade. Because if he appears, it signals dominance and control, and if he does not appear, it signals strategy and repositioning. And either outcome becomes symbolic, either outcome feeds the story, either outcome keeps the machine theory alive. And the machine theory is what gives this entire narrative its spine. Because she does not describe random defenders or scattered publicists scrambling online, she describes an entire machine working to salvage an image. And when you call something a machine, you imply coordination, you imply hierarchy, you imply funding, you imply intent, and you imply that this machine does not activate for ordinary individuals, it activates for assets. That is the word that lingers beneath everything she says without being spoken directly. Asset. If someone is allegedly an asset, they are protected. If someone is protected, they are valuable. If someone is valuable to powerful interests, they are positioned carefully. And if they are positioned carefully, their rise may not have been accidental. This is where the cultural betrayal angle intensifies, because Jaguar's most explosive claim is not about personal behavior. It is about collective impact. It is about being used to keep the blacks in line, and whether people believe that statement or reject it, the shock value alone forces people to re-examine history through a new lens. Because what does keeping in line even mean in a modern context? It could mean guiding narratives. It could mean encouraging certain themes over others. It could mean aligning with corporate-friendly activism rather than disruptive movements. It could mean steering cultural rebellion into profitable lanes that never truly threaten power structures. And when she says he was allegedly chosen and selected, she implies that someone had the authority to do the choosing. That is the part that disturbs people most, because it suggests there are architects behind the scenes who decide which voices amplify and which voices fade. And that idea destabilizes the myth of pure meritocracy in hip-hop. Hip-hop has always celebrated hustle, the grind, the independent rise, the story of climbing from nothing to something. And Jaguar's framing flips that narrative by suggesting that the climb might have been monitored, approved, perhaps even guided in ways the public never considered. And the media silence angle strengthens that suspicion, because she points directly at outlets that are not reporting on certain names allegedly appearing in those files. And in the world of scandal, silence often feels louder than noise, because if something were harmless, why avoid it? If something were false, why not dismantle it aggressively? If something were irrelevant, why not laugh it off openly? Instead, she frames the response as careful, measured, calculated, as if the machine prefers subtle redirection over open confrontation. And that subtlety is what fuels conspiracy narratives, because subtlety creates space for imagination, and imagination thrives in silence. Then there is the loyalty factor, because she questions why fans defend him so intensely, why criticism triggers immediate backlash, why questioning feels almost taboo, and that cultural loyalty becomes part of the control theory itself. Because if people refuse to question, then no structural challenge ever forms. Belief becomes the shield, reputation becomes armor, legacy becomes insulation. And in that ecosystem, even serious allegations struggle to gain traction. The tension between empowerment and alignment is where this story truly lives, because Jay-Z's public image is rooted in ownership, black wealth, generational strategy, business mastery, and cultural influence, and those achievements are undeniable, which is precisely why Jaguar's framing feels so volatile. because it suggests that empowerment could coexist with alignment to corporate power, that both things could be true simultaneously, and that duality unsettles people. Because it forces the question, can someone rise from the streets and still become a stabilizing force for the very structures hip-hop once rebelled against? Can someone negotiate corporate partnerships and still represent disruption? Can someone stand on the Super Bowl stage and still claim underground authenticity? Jaguar's narrative suggests that the transformation from rebel to negotiator might not have been evolution, but selection. And that is a powerful accusation. But what makes this entire saga even more combustible is the timing. Because conversations about elite control, secret files, media protection, and cultural manipulation are already trending themes in public discourse. And when you insert a globally recognized name into that narrative, the reaction becomes explosive. People who idolize him feel attacked. People who distrust corporations feel validated. People who love conspiracy see confirmation. People who reject conspiracy see recklessness. And in that clash, the algorithm thrives. The Super Bowl becomes symbolic of something larger, not just a sporting event, but a stage of influence, a curated display of what culture looks like when filtered through corporate sponsorship and mass approval. And if Jaguar's claims were even partially true, then the halftime show would not just be entertainment, it would be programming. Programming does not require lies. It requires emphasis. It requires spotlighting certain voices while muting others. It requires shaping what rebellion looks like so it fits within acceptable boundaries. And if someone sits at the intersection of hip-hop and corporate America, they naturally become the bridge between rebellion and compliance. Whether that bridge is strategic genius or calculated placement depends on who you ask. Jaguar is clearly in one camp. Her tone throughout feels like someone tired of pretending not to see patterns, tired of watching narratives spin, tired of watching people ignore what she believes is obvious. And that exhaustion fuels the drama of this story. Because she is not presenting herself as guessing. She presents herself as knowing. Knowing what the files allegedly say. Knowing how the machine allegedly operates. Knowing how charm allegedly masks strategy. Knowing how silence allegedly protects power. And when someone speaks with that level of certainty, it shakes even those who disagree. The unanswered question remains the same. If the files exist in the way she describes, who else is named? If media silence is real, how coordinated is it? If the machine is active, what exactly is it protecting? And if the Super Bowl becomes the next visual symbol of this entire debate, will the public see spectacle or strategy? Because once an idea enters the cultural bloodstream, it never fully disappears. The idea that someone was chosen, the idea that culture can be steered, the idea that empowerment can double as containment. Those ideas linger. They spark debates. They create division. They generate views. And whether Jaguar's claims are embraced, rejected, or dissected endlessly, one thing is undeniable. She did not just accuse a man. She accused a system. And when you accuse a system, the reaction is never quiet. The reaction is layered, strategic, measured, machine-like. And now the spotlight moves to the biggest stage in America, the Super Bowl, where influence, music, branding, and culture collide under bright lights while millions watch. And somewhere in that glare, the question continues to echo. Was the empire built from hustle alone? Or was it assembled with intention? That is the storm Jaguar unleashed. And storms like this do not fade quietly.